What's fascinating about this team is you know exactly what this team is. And what I mean by that, I know that doesn't sound as I know I kind of uh, teased that and the outcome wasn't the greatest, but you know exactly what this team is. And when we talk about, for instance, when we talk about other teams in the NFL, some teams have a lot of question marks. When we talk about the Commanders, you don't know how they're going to be. You don't know how Sam Howell's going to be. You don't know if the offensive line is going to hold out, what this wide receiver core is going to look like. You just don't know until you honestly see it. On the same thing with the Jets a little bit. We think we know. We think it's going to be great, but we don't know what the Jets are going to look like because – I mean, again, you have an older roster. I mean, an older quarterback. You just don't know. With this Cincinnati Bengals team, you know exactly what you have. You have a top-tier quarterback in Joe Burrow. You have arguably the best running back, or not running back, I'm sorry, the best receiving or skill set core, or best receiving core in football, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. You also have Joe Mixon coming out the backfield at the running back position. You know what you're getting from this roster. You also know that the offensive line has been a huge problem for this team. You also know that the defense, while the front or the defensive front, the linebackers, the DBs, that they're good. But the secondary is not the best, especially when we talk about the safety position. We know exactly what this Cincinnati Bengals team is. We also know the ceiling of this Cincinnati Bengals team is obviously the Super Bowl. Just 2 years ago, they made it to the Super Bowl. The next year, they made it to the AFC Championship. I'm not saying that this team is going to win the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that this team is just Super Bowl favorites, at least in this division. But what I will say is, I think there's danger, but not in a good danger for you going into a game or let me say this, it makes you very dangerous when a team knows exactly what you are, but has no way of stopping you. This offense is prolific when we talk about the Cincinnati Bengals offense. It is prolific. And the thing that this offense does, in my opinion, better than, say, the Bills is they are able to, when I say they, of course, I'm talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, they're able to equally distribute running plays to passing plays. Now, yes, they do pass more than they run, obviously, but it doesn't feel like the Bills. Like when we watch the Bills, it just feels like they're overly reliant on Josh Allen, especially when they have Stephon Diggs and they have Gabe Davis, and their running back position is kind of a question mark, but it's more of a question mark because they don't use it as much. We don't know if they're good. We don't know if it's bad, but we do know that there's not going to be used as much. So it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way for the Cincinnati Bengals, and it could feel that way because, again, you have arguably the best wide receiver core in football. They have 3 individuals that can be ones anywhere. And they have 1 individual in Jamar Chase that you can argue is a top 5, arguably top 3 wide receiver in football. So I understand when you look at that and you see that and you see how great Joe Burrow is. To me, Joe Burrow is arguably the second best quarterback in football. It's very easy to fall into that, okay, Joe Burrow's going to save us, or okay, we can just pass, because it's like, who's going to stop us? And we've seen that work for this team. I mean, we've seen Joe Burrow at his best. We've seen greatness. So so I do commend um the Cincinnati Bengals and this offense for not feeling too reliant on Joe Burrow. And that's also a testament to how good Joe Mixon is. I don't think that anybody would put Joe Mixon in that class as, one of the best running backs in football, but I do think that he's one of the most important, and he makes this offense damn near unstoppable. And I know it's crazy to say when like I said, I've just been bigging up this wide receiver core, and I've been bigging up Joe Burrow, and rightfully so. While I think that they're more important to this offense, obviously, I think that having Joe Mixon and having the ability to hand the ball off to him, having the ability to pass to him so he can become pretty much another receiver, it just does wonders for this team. However, there's always a however in football. There's never a sure thing. And I think it's not just football, it's sports, man. There's never really a sure thing. There's always a however. And that however is usually the thing that could derail something. It could derail a team. It could derail, you never know. But that's the beauty of sports. There's always a however. Now, of course, if it's your team, you never want there to be a however, or you never want that however to be realized. But there's always a however. So for this Cincinnati Bengals team, we know what their downfall is. We know what their demise could be. And that, of course, is what it's been for the last few years. It's been their offensive line, and it's been their secondary. We talk a lot about the importance of keeping your quarterback safe and keeping your quarterback as or as clean, what they say in football, as possible. One of the biggest reasons why Tom Brady was as successful as he was is because year after year after year, he was one of the least touched quarterbacks. That's one thing that goes hella under the radar when we talk about the success and the dynasty, the dominance of the Patriots. We always talk about Tom Brady. We always talk about Bill Belichick. We always talk about the defense and how they've had people like Teddy Bruschi and just Vince Wilfork. Like, they've had Hall of Fame players on the defensive side of the ball. And of course, that's always talked about. But one thing that's never really talked about, because obviously it's not the most glamorous position, but one thing that's very seldomly talked about when we talk about the Patriots dynasty is their focus on the offensive line. Because when you have something, you need to be, when you have something great like that, it's almost malpractice not to take it as far as it can go. And you understand, if you want to preserve something great, you have to do what it takes to preserve it. You have to do what it takes to allow it to live in its prime state. And when you have a team as great as the Patriots, you know that the one thing that can hurt us at this point is an injury to Tom Brady. In fact, the years that the Patriots did not succeed, outside of course, the years that Tom Brady was older or something, was because he was injured or suspended. But I think they won that year. This Cincinnati Bengals team, they have to understand, and I know it's tough. We talked about the Kansas City Chiefs last episode, and I talked about the roster and how the roster is not really that good. However, when you have a player as good as Patrick Mahomes, he has been able to keep this roster a Super Bowl, obviously, caliber roster just because of how great he is. And yes, Andy Reid is important and Travis Kelce is important, but I understand when you have someone on that level and you have to make them a priority. That's why we talked about it last episode. That's why when you see teams, and a lot of the teams that their quarterback makes the most money or their quarterback is one of the highest paid players in the NFL, those teams haven't really seen success because it's very hard to then build around that player because most of the money is going to that player. So I understand, you prioritizing Joe Burrow and you prioritizing Jamar Chase, seeing as though, now, yes, I understand they haven't got their new contracts yet, but seeing as though that Joe Burrow has seen his most success with or alongside Jamar Chase. But it kind of like the Titans. Year after year, the Titans have the same. It seems like they're in the same wheel. Like they're like a hamster, just doing the same thing, trying to get to a destination, but you're not moving. That's the same thing I see with this Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. Now, yes, I know last year their two of their offensive linemen was out, and that could have. We saw how the AFC Championship ended with, of course, the defensive foul or defensive penalty that gave the Cincinnati Bengals gave the Kansas City Chiefs 15 more yards. They hit the game-winning field goal. Bada bing, bada boom. So we saw that, and we saw how good the offensive line was until it wasn't. And honestly, the two times that we've seen the Cincinnati Bengals lose at their biggest moments, which of course is the Super Bowl and the AFC Championship the year after, their offensive line was a huge reason why. When we talk about the Super Bowl, Von Miller and Aaron Donald went crazy on Joe Burrow, especially the second half. When we talk about the AFC Championship last year, it was Chris Jones that had a monumental game, especially the second half of that game. If you don't have all your ducks aligned, it doesn't matter how beautiful your team can look. It doesn't matter how epic your team can be. If your offensive line is not up to par, you always have a weakness. It's like the Death Star. The Death Star is, for all my Star Wars fans, to me, the Cincinnati Bengals is like the Death Star. It is such a monumental. It's a juggernaut. It is this team is a weapon of mass destruction. This team can look unstoppable at times. There's been multiple games where I've seen this team play horribly the first half, and the next half look like gangbusters. This team is the Death Star. However, the Death Star ultimately had one weakness, and that weakness ultimately ruined them. And these last 2 years, that weakness has ruined the Cincinnati Bengals. And that, of course, is their offensive line and their safeties. So, again, with this team, I can't. It's all right. So one of the biggest, again, reasons why I said that the AFC North is one of the, or to me, is the best division in football is because you, to me, I bold success in the division by how good you can be compared to how bad you can be. If we talked about, to me, the worst division in football, which is what I started with, it was the NFC South. And we talked about the best and we talked about the worst. And what I mean by that is when we talk about the NFC South, there's obviously one team that is good enough to win the division and is going to win the division, is ultimately going to get a playoff berth. But outside of that team, I don't think any of those teams, outside of possibly the Saints, are good enough to compete for a playoff spot. Maybe a wild card, but I don't know. I think that, maybe the Panthers are good enough to compete for a wild card, but I don't think that they will be in the thick of the playoff race. I could be obviously wrong. These are my predictions, but I just think the floor is so low for that division. When we go back to the AFC South and we're talking about this Cincinnati Bengals team, it's hard for me, unless there's a major injury, it's hard for me to not see this team. And honestly, it's hard for me to not see any of these teams outside of maybe one, but we'll talk about it. It's hard for me to not see any of these teams at least compete for a playoff position. I know one of them obviously is going to win the division, but it's challenging for me to see any one of these teams not make the playoffs. One team has ultimately changed my mind, and again, we'll talk about them a little later, but yeah. The biggest reason why I think the NFC or AFC North is the best division because the floor. Forget the ceiling. The floor is high. Like it's this team, this division is going to be a gauntlet. It's going to be cutthroat, and they're going, to me, the biggest hindrance to this division is the other teams in the division. I think that, well, no, I don't think that the Cincinnati Bengals has the best roster in this division. I do, however, think that it has the best player in Joe Burrow. It has the best wide receiver core. And it also has the experience of the last 2 years. This team, this quarterback, this wide receiver core knows how it is to be in a Super Bowl, and they understand what it takes to get there. So I would be shocked if this team has a major regression. But if they do, and there goes the however, if they do have a major regression, it is because they're all, the issues and problems that have affected them will continue and are going to rear its ugly head, and that, of course, is their offensive line and their safeties. Now, again, you can kind of chalk up, you may possibly be able to chalk up last year because, again, 2 of their offensive linemen were out. And even with that, it pretty much came to a boneheaded roughing the passer last-second play that the Cincinnati Bengals committed on Patrick Mahomes and ultimately won them the game. And if it wasn't for that, it probably would have went to overtime, and you never know. But anyone that watched the game honestly saw that the Chris Jones had a field day, especially in the second half. This team is good enough, obviously, to win a Super Bowl. It's just, is this offense, is the skilled positions. Are they good enough and can hold off long enough to, or hold up, let me say, long enough to overcome their shortcomings? Oh man, you stayed to the end of the video. I appreciate you. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss any content from your boy. You can also go back and watch past episodes, past clips, and don't forget that the Unpopular Podcast, new episodes drop every Wednesday and Saturday. Appreciate you.